Squidward's suicide. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studio for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most of internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episode days before they aired. I'll get right into it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season, but the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and the sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often pick up the mock title card. Sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Billabye. When SpongeBob Patrick adopts a sea scalp, nothing particularly funny, but worked with the chuckles. So when we saw the title card Squidward's suicide, we didn't think anything of it besides a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down, as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubbles splash the screen, and it comes up. We see the ending of Squidward's concert. This was when things seemed to begin off. While playing a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with the animation, so yeah, it's not that common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as it skips. Never happens. There's a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing, this is a comment in the show, but you could clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and he looks visibly afraid. The shot goes into the crowd with SpongeBob in the center frame, and he too is booing. Very much unlike him. That isn't the real oddest thing though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed, clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view of his porthole window is the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even the feedback from the speakers in the room. As if the speakers were turned off. Though, their status show them working perfectly fine. He just sat there, blinking in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly, and he put his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, the sound in the background was very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at 10 shots second apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists on itself for a split second and back to normal. The wind through the trees sound get louder and more severe, as if the storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part of the sound is Squidward sobbing. Sounded real, as if its sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming through the other side. As a good sound as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase equipment to be that good to produce that sound of quality. Below, the sound of the wind and sobbing very faint. Something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor passed on and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He could have been no more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach crudely cut open, and his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was the shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags, or markers, and the angle was completely off for the shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke.
The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down from his face and from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style. Looking as if you touch it, you get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as there was a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing, a deep baritone lasting at a longer interval and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back. We were all, but we knew we had to. This time the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her baronets in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out. Naked except for her underpants, her entrails were piled on top of her another crude cut along her back. The body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, similar in size and shape to the first. I had choked back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. After about 5 seconds, after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyperrealism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and the most fear-inducing of all, his sobbing was mixed with the screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time, the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from the stomach, from a stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down. The animators proceed. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited to the floor. The animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as they were 5 different photos. They were played out as they were frames of a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We saw the 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this, Mr. Hillenberg. Arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as why he was called down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame for the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out to a deep voice saying,
"Do it."
And we see Squidward's hand, a shotgun. He immediately put the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatter the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed on his side, one eye dangling, and what's left is above the floor staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the heck was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only severed the imprint, the entirety of it in my mind, and caused me to have horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze what had happened. The analyst of the file did show it was edited by over new material. However, the time stamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time, but everyone checked out fine. We don't know what happened to this day. Nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues in the profile. I never believed in an explainable phenomenon before, but now that I have something happen I can't prove anything about it beyond accidental evidence. I think twice about things now.